Before zombies ran fast, they walked, stared, and haunted your nightmares long after the screen went dark. Tonight, let's travel back to the era where dread was slow, practical, and unforgettable. These classic zombie movies didn't rely on CGI, they relied on atmosphere, silence, and pure unease. As each title unfolds, ask yourself, which one would you survive? Stay with me to the end, because some of these films changed horror forever. If you love classic horror, hit like, share this video with a fellow fan, and subscribe. The grave is always open here. 1. Dawn of the Dead, 1978. What if the safest place on Earth slowly revealed who you really are when the world ends? Would you recognize yourself? The doors slide shut. The escalators hum. Outside, the dead wander with empty eyes. Inside, the lights are still on. Dawn of the Dead doesn't rush to scare you, it invites you in. Lets you get comfortable, and then quietly asks a dangerous question. What would you become if survival felt like winning? From the first moments, Romero turns a shopping mall into a mirror. And before you know it, you're staring at your own reflection. As the survivors settle into their strange paradise, there's a seductive calm. Food is plentiful, music echoes through empty stores. You can almost feel the thrill of owning a world that no longer belongs to anyone else. And that's where the film gets under your skin. The zombies outside aren't just monsters, they're reminders. They return to the mall not because they're hungry, but because this place meant something to them when they were alive. Doesn't that thought linger a little too close to home? Romero tells this story like a slow-burning campfire tale. There's humor here, dark and uncomfortable, sitting right next to brutal violence. One moment you laugh, the next you flinch, and in between, you start asking yourself questions you didn't expect. If the world collapsed tomorrow, would you cling to comfort or to people? Would safety be enough, or would boredom rot you from the inside out? What makes Dawn of the Dead timeless isn't just the gore or the iconic blue-gray zombies. It's the creeping realization that the living are often more trapped than the dead. The mall becomes a golden cage, and freedom slowly fades beneath routine and false control. By the time chaos returns, you may realize the apocalypse didn't destroy humanity, it simply exposed it. So tell me, honestly, would you stay in the mall, or would you walk away before it changes you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your answer might say more than you think. 2. Day of the Dead, 1985. When the world is already dead. The real horror is discovering who still deserves to be called human. There is no escape fantasy here. No malls, no open roads, no illusion of freedom. Day of the Dead drops you underground, into concrete walls that feel tighter with every breath. Above the bunker, the dead own the planet. Below it, the living are slowly tearing each other apart. And from the very first scene, the film whispers a chilling idea. Maybe the apocalypse didn't end humanity. Maybe it finally revealed it. This is a zombie story told in the aftertaste of survival. The characters aren't fighting to save the world anymore. They're fighting to justify staying alive. Scientists argue with soldiers. Authority clashes with reason. Hope feels like a rumor from another lifetime. Romero doesn't rush the terror. He lets it simmer. Like pressure building in a sealed room, daring you to ask yourself how long you'd last before snapping. And then there are the zombies. Not just monsters, but experiments. The idea that the dead might learn, remember, even feel, is deeply unsettling. Watching Bub struggle with fragments of his former self forces an uncomfortable question onto the viewer. If memory survives death, where does humanity really end? Is it the lack of a heartbeat, or the absence of empathy? The soldiers bark orders and cling to violence like a life raft. Convinced power equals control, but control slips through their fingers with every passing scene. The scientists chase progress, desperate to believe knowledge still matters. Caught between them are people just trying to survive the noise. It's exhausting to watch, intentionally so. Day of the Dead wants you to feel trapped, irritated, angry, because that's what the end of the world might actually feel like. There's a cruel beauty in how the film unfolds. The slow pacing isn't a flaw, it's a warning. When nothing changes, tension becomes unbearable. By the time everything explodes into blood and chaos, it feels less like shock and more like inevitability. You don't jump, you nod, You knew this was coming. What makes Day of the Dead unforgettable isn't its brutality, it's its pessimism. This isn't a story about survival against zombies. It's about survival with other humans. And Romero seems deeply unsure that we're up to the task. So let me ask you, if you were locked underground with the end of the world pressing in, who would scare you more, the dead above, or the living beside you? Tell me in the comments. I'm genuinely curious where your fear points. 3. Zombie 2, 1979. What if the dead didn't just rise to hunt the living, but to drag the world itself back into decay? This film doesn't open with comfort or explanation. It opens with unease, like stepping onto an island where the air already feels wrong. Zombie doesn't ask for your permission, it dares you to keep watching. From the first eerie moments, Lucio Fulci invites you into a nightmare where logic dissolves and death feels ancient, patient, and inevitable, and somewhere deep down, a question begins to pulse. What if nature itself wants us gone? Unlike Romero's social mirrors, Zombie feels like a curse. The story moves like a fever dream, drifting from civilized spaces into something primal and rotten. Sunlight doesn't save you here. The ocean doesn't cleanse you. Even paradise becomes hostile. Every frame feels soaked in decay, as if the island itself remembers something terrible and refuses to forget it. Fulci's zombies are slow, relentless, and horrifyingly physical. These aren't metaphors walking on two legs, they are corpses that creak, tear, and bleed with unsettling realism. The violence doesn't shock for spectacle alone, it lingers, forcing you to look away and then pulling your eyes back again. You don't just watch death in this film, you feel it grinding forward, inch by inch. And then there's that infamous moment. You know the one. A scene so surreal, so audacious, that it crosses from horror into legend. A confrontation that shouldn't exist, yet somehow feels inevitable in this world. It's the kind of image that burns itself into your memory and resurfaces years later when you least expect it. Be honest. Did that scene stay with you longer than most modern horror films ever have? What truly separates Zombie from its peers is its atmosphere of doom. There's no belief that things can be fixed. No illusion that science, weapons, or courage will save the day. The characters move forward because stopping feels worse than dying. And that hopeless momentum seeps into you as a viewer. You don't ask who will survive. You ask how long before everything is swallowed. By the final moments, the film delivers a bleak, unforgettable statement. Civilization doesn't fall with a scream here. It erodes, quietly, inevitably, like waves eating away at stone. Fulci isn't interested in redemption. He's interested in decay as destiny. So let me ask you, do you prefer zombie films that scare you with ideas, or ones that haunt you with images you can never unsee? Tell me in the comments. And if Zombie left a mark on you, I want to know exactly where. 4. The Return of the Living Dead, 1985. What if zombies weren't silent, slow, and mindless, but screaming, laughing, and begging for brains while the world burns? This one doesn't ease you in. It grabs you by the collar, laughs in your face, and then drops a corpse on your expectations. The Return of the Living Dead opens like a prank gone wrong. The kind you can't take back once the smell of death hits the room. From that moment on, the film asks a wickedly fun question. How terrifying would the apocalypse be if it absolutely refused to take itself seriously? The story feels like a late-night confession told over cheap beer and bad decisions. A single mistake unleashes something no one understands. And suddenly death isn't just walking, it's talking. These zombies don't shuffle. They sprint. They think. They suffer. And worst of all, they know exactly what they want. When a corpse looks straight at you and explains why it eats brains, the joke curdles into something deeply unsettling. You laugh, then you realize you shouldn't. What makes this film so unforgettable is its tone. Horror and comedy don't politely take turns, they collide. One moment you're amused by punk rock chaos and cynical humor. The next you're watching genuine despair unfold. The characters aren't heroes, they're young, reckless, scared, and painfully human. They scream, panic, and make everything worse. And somehow, that honesty makes the nightmare feel closer, not farther away. The zombies themselves are a revelation. They don't die when shot. They don't stop when burned. Every solution only spreads the problem. There's a cruel irony here that lingers long after the credits roll. The more desperately humans try to fix things, the more irreversible the damage becomes. Sound familiar? Beneath the jokes and neon-soaked madness, there's a bleak core. This is one of the few zombie films that outright denies hope. No cure, no victory, no last stand that saves the day. Just escalation. The ending doesn't comfort you, it dares you to sit with the consequences. When the final choice is made, it feels less like a solution and more like surrender. And yet, people love this film, not despite its nihilism, but because of it. It understands that sometimes laughter is just another way of screaming. The punk soundtrack, the gallows humor, the self-awareness, it all masks a deeply cynical view of authority, science, and control. Adults don't save the day here. Rules don't matter. And the dead? They've already won. So tell me this. Do you think zombies are scarier when they're tragic monsters, or when they know exactly what they're doing and joke about it? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this film made you laugh and feel uneasy, you're not alone. That's exactly the point. 5. City of the Living Dead, 1980. What if a single moment cracked the gates of hell, and the dead didn't rush out, but waited for you to notice? This story begins with a suicide. Quiet, isolated, almost easy to ignore, and that's the most unsettling part. City of the Living Dead doesn't scream its danger, it whispers it. Then dares you to lean closer. From that opening moment, the film plants a dreadful idea in your mind. What if the apocalypse isn't loud, but slow, and already happening? Lucio Fulci doesn't treat this movie like a plot to be solved. He treats it like a curse unfolding. The town of Dunwich feels wrong before anything truly horrific occurs. Streets are empty, faces look distant, time itself seems slightly out of sync. As a viewer, you're not guided, you're abandoned. And in that disorientation, fear has room to breathe. The dead in this film don't behave like typical zombies. They don't swarm or chase. They exist, watching, waiting. When violence arrives, it's sudden, surreal, and deeply uncomfortable. Fulci's camera lingers in moments most films would cut away from, forcing you to confront imagery that feels less like entertainment and more like intrusion. You don't jump, you freeze. What makes City of the Living Dead so disturbing is its logic. Or rather, its refusal to provide one. Death isn't a virus here. It's a consequence, a metaphysical punishment set into motion by a broken ritual. The idea that one act, one failure, could poison reality itself feels ancient, almost biblical, and that taps into something primal. How many things do we assume are holding the world together, without ever checking if they're still intact? The characters move through the film like sleepwalkers in a nightmare. They try to understand what's happening, but understanding never brings safety. Knowledge doesn't save anyone here, it only reveals how hopeless the situation truly is. Each discovery feels less like progress and more like confirmation that something irreversible has already occurred. Visually, the film is soaked in decay. Fog hangs heavy, graves refuse to stay closed. And when the dead finally assert themselves, it's not with spectacle, it's with intimacy. Fulci makes horror personal. The violence isn't about numbers, it's about proximity. About being too close to something you should never have seen. By the time the film ends, there's no real relief, no clean resolution, just the haunting sense that evil wasn't defeated, only acknowledged. City of the Living Dead leaves you with an unanswered question echoing in the dark. What if hell isn't a place you go, but a place that quietly opens where you already live? So tell me, do you find this kind of horror more terrifying than traditional zombie chaos? Would you rather face an army of the dead, or a town where reality itself is rotting? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to know which fear stays with you longer. 6. Burial Ground. Nights of Terror, 1981. What if the dead didn't rise to conquer the world, but to violate the last illusion of safety inside your family? This film doesn't creep up on you. It feels wrong almost immediately. Burial Ground opens like an elegant nightmare, set in sunlit ruins and decaying aristocratic spaces where history refuses to stay buried. At first, it seems restrained, almost classical. Then something shifts. And you realize this isn't a zombie movie meant to scare you in familiar ways. It's meant to make you deeply uncomfortable for reasons you can't quite explain. The dead awaken not because of science or infection, but because the past itself is disturbed. Ancient graves are opened, and what rises from them isn't cinematic spectacle, it's rot, confusion, and hunger. These zombies don't rush. They crawl, stumble, moan, and claw like memories that should have stayed forgotten. Watching them feels less like witnessing an attack and more like watching decay reclaim what always belonged to it. What truly separates Burial Ground from other zombie films is its intimacy. This horror doesn't stay outside the walls. It seeps into rooms, relationships, and unspoken taboos. The setting, a decaying villa, becomes a symbol of old privilege, old sins, and old boundaries dissolving. As night falls, the living and the dead aren't clearly separated anymore. And that blurred line is where the film becomes disturbing in ways few zombie movies ever dare. There's a sense throughout the film that something is fundamentally off. Characters behave strangely. Conversations feel unnatural. Tension isn't built through action, but through proximity. The uncomfortable closeness between people who should feel safe with one another, but don't. And then, when the zombies finally overwhelm the space, it feels less like an invasion and more like an exposure, as if the dead are simply revealing what was already broken. Violence here is ugly, awkward, and mean-spirited. There's no heroic last stand, no noble sacrifice, just panic, betrayal, and bodies failing when they're needed most. The zombies aren't powerful because they're unstoppable, they're powerful because the living are weak, distracted, and morally adrift. That realization lingers far longer than the gore. And then there's that aspect of the film, the moment many viewers never forget, not because it's frightening in a traditional sense, but because it crosses into something taboo, something unsettling on a psychological level. You don't scream, you recoil, and you ask yourself why this made you feel worse than any zombie attack. By the end, Burial Ground leaves you hollow, not shocked, unsettled. It doesn't argue that humanity can't survive the dead. It suggests something darker, that when structures collapse, desire, fear, and decay don't disappear, they surface. So let me ask you, do you think horror should have limits, or is crossing them exactly what makes it unforgettable? Did this film disturb you because of the zombies, or because of the people? Share your thoughts in the comments. This one always divides viewers. 7. The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue, 1974. What if saving the planet became the very thing that woke the dead, and no one wanted to listen? This film begins with a disagreement, not a scream, a clash of ideas. Technology versus nature, youth versus authority. The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue quietly plants a thought that feels almost prophetic. What if our attempt to clean the world actually poisoned it? From that moment on, the horror unfolds not as spectacle, but as consequence. There's a strange calm to the way this story moves. Open countryside, fresh air, a sense that life should be peaceful here. And yet, something is already wrong beneath the surface. The dead don't rise because of curses or ancient evils, but because of progress. Machines meant to kill insects, waves meant to cleanse the land. It's unsettling because it feels plausible. The film doesn't ask you to suspend disbelief. It asks you to recognize patterns you might already know. The zombies themselves are among the most unsettling of the era. Pale, damaged, angry. These aren't faceless monsters wandering aimlessly. They feel personal. They recognize. They accuse. When they attack, it feels less like hunger and more like rage, as if the earth itself is fighting back through them. Watching them, you can't help but wonder, are they villains, or evidence? But the true horror doesn't walk on two dead feet. It wears a badge. Authority in this film is loud, arrogant, and disastrously wrong. The police inspector, obsessed with control and tradition, dismisses every warning, every sign, every truth that doesn't fit his worldview. And that stubborn blindness becomes more dangerous than the undead themselves. You find yourself shouting internally, wanting to shake him, knowing full well it won't matter. What makes this film linger is its tone of frustration. The protagonists aren't heroes in the traditional sense. They don't carry weapons or grand plans. They carry knowledge, and no one wants it. Every attempt to explain the situation only deepens suspicion. Every effort to help pushes them closer to condemnation. It's horror born from being unheard. There's a raw anger beneath the surface of this movie. A political edge that cuts sharper with time. Environmental destruction. Generational conflict. Institutional ignorance. Wrapped inside a zombie narrative. These themes hit harder than expected. And when violence erupts, it feels tragic rather than thrilling. Proof that disaster was avoidable. If only someone had listened sooner. The ending doesn't offer comfort. It leaves you with a bitter aftertaste. The kind that makes you reflect rather than relax. The living dead at Manchester Morgue isn't interested in thrills for their own sake. It wants you unsettled. It wants you thinking about the cost of denial. So let me ask you, which frightens you more, an unstoppable outbreak? Or a world where the truth is ignored until it's far too late? Do you see this film as horror, or as a warning disguised as one? Share your thoughts in the comments. This one feels more relevant with every passing year. 8. White Zombie, 1932. What if losing your soul didn't require death, only surrender? Silence, and someone else's control? This is where it all begins. Before flesh-eating hordes, before apocalypse fantasies, White Zombie whispers a far older fear, the terror of being alive. Awake, and no longer yourself. The film doesn't shock you with violence. It unsettles you with stillness. With eyes that stare but don't see. With bodies that move, yet belong to someone else. Set against the shadowy mysticism of Haiti, the story feels like a dark folktale told by candlelight. A young woman is desired, denied, and then taken in the most horrifying way imaginable, not through murder, but through erasure. She walks, she breathes, she smiles, and yet, she is gone. Watching this unfold, you realize this isn't a zombie film about death at all. It's about possession, about what happens when free will is quietly stolen. Bela Lugosi's presence dominates the film like a spell you can't break. His calm voice, his unwavering stare, his absolute control over the undead workers creates an atmosphere thick with dread. He doesn't rage or rush. He commands, and that makes him far more terrifying than any monster that lunges from the dark. This is evil dressed as authority, confidence, and certainty. The zombies here aren't grotesque corpses. They're hollowed-out people, former workers, former lovers, former lives, reduced to tools. They toil endlessly, silently, without resistance, and that silence is haunting. It forces you to imagine the nightmare of awareness trapped inside a body that no longer obeys. Would you rather die, or live forever as something owned? What makes White Zombie endure is its mood. Fog drifts like memory. Shadows stretch unnaturally long. The world feels unstable, as if reality itself might slip if you blink too long. There's a sadness woven into the horror. A mourning for identity and love lost not to death, but to domination. Viewed today, the film carries uncomfortable layers. Power dynamics, colonial overtones, fear of control masquerading as exotic mystery. And yet, that discomfort only deepens its impact. This is horror born from anxiety about autonomy, about what happens when your voice no longer matters. When your choices are made for you. Unlike modern zombie films, there's no chaos here, no collapse of civilization. The horror is intimate, personal, a single woman, a single obsession, a single act of theft that ripples outward. It asks you to lean in, not recoil, and in doing so, it traps you in its quiet dread. So let me ask you, do you find this kind of horror more disturbing than gore and violence? Is losing control of your body scarier than losing your life? Share your thoughts in the comments. This is where zombie horror truly began, and its fear is still very much alive. 9. I Walked with a Zombie, 1943. What if the most terrifying thing wasn't the undead, but the silence of a woman who can no longer speak for herself? This film drifts in like a dream you don't immediately understand. I Walked with a Zombie doesn't announce its horror. It lets it breathe. The fear here isn't sharp or sudden, it's soft, humid, and haunting, like night air that presses against your skin. From the very first moments, the movie invites you to listen closely, because the scariest things are never said out loud. Set on a Caribbean island soaked in moonlight and superstition, the story unfolds like a tragic lullaby. A nurse arrives, practical and rational, believing in medicine and reason. What she finds instead is a woman who walks, breathes, and exists, but isn't truly alive. And as you watch that silent figure move through candlelit corridors, a question slowly takes hold. Is this woman sick, or already lost to something deeper than death? Unlike later zombie films, there is no decay here. No gore, no chaos. The horror lives in stillness, in eyes that never focus, in footsteps that follow commands without resistance. The famous nighttime walk through the sugarcane fields feels almost sacred, yet unbearably tense. Drums echo in the distance, shadows sway, and you realize you're witnessing something that feels less like a monster movie and more like a forbidden ritual. What makes I Walked with a Zombie so powerful is its sadness. This is not a story about fighting the undead. It's about loving someone who may already be gone. The film treats zombification not as spectacle, but as a state of living death, an existence without agency. Watching it today, the metaphor feels heartbreakingly clear. What is left of a person when their voice, will, and choices are taken away? There's also a quiet respect for belief systems that modern horror often lacks. The film never mocks voodoo or dismisses it as simple superstition. Instead, it allows science and faith to coexist uneasily, neither fully winning. That tension creates a lingering unease. You're never quite sure which worldview is right, and that uncertainty is where the fear settles in. Visually, the film is pure atmosphere. Fog rolls like memory. Light and shadow carve faces into masks. Every frame feels deliberate, restrained, almost poetic. It's horror you absorb slowly. The kind that stays with you long after the film ends because it never demanded your attention, it earned it. And when the story finally resolves, it doesn't explode, it exhales. There's no triumph, no victory over evil, just acceptance, loss, and the understanding that some things cannot be fixed, only mourned. That quiet ending may be more unsettling than any scream. So tell me, do you find this kind of gentle, sorrowful horror more disturbing than violence and chaos? Would you rather face a monster that attacks, or a fate where you simply fade away while still alive? Share your thoughts in the comments. This film proves that sometimes, the softest horror leaves the deepest scars. 10. The Plague of the Zombies, 1966. What if the dead rose not to end the world, but to keep an old power alive at any cost? This film feels like a secret unearthed from deep underground. The Plague of the Zombies doesn't explode with chaos, it exhumes dread slowly. Like soil being brushed away from a forgotten grave. From its opening moments, you sense that something ancient is at work, something that never truly left. Only waited, and the question quietly settles in. What horrors survive simply because we refuse to confront them? Set in a fog-drenched Cornish village, the story unfolds like a Gothic curse passed from one generation to the next. Mines collapse, workers die, funerals pile up, and yet, bodies refuse to stay where they belong. Hammer Films wraps the zombie myth in period atmosphere, turning superstition, class, and exploitation into something far more unsettling than a simple outbreak. These zombies aren't the result of science or apocalypse. They are tools, slaves. The Walking Dead here exist to serve the living, forced back into labor by rituals meant to preserve wealth and control. Watching them stumble through the mines, you realize the true horror isn't that they're dead, it's that even death isn't enough to free them. That idea lingers like a bad taste you can't wash away. The film's villain doesn't rant or rage. He hides behind respectability, tradition, and secrecy, and that makes him terrifying. This is evil that survives by blending in, by convincing a community that suffering is normal, necessary, even deserved. As the mystery unfolds, you begin to see how fear and silence become accomplices, how entire villages can rot from the inside while pretending nothing is wrong. Visually, the movie is rich with atmosphere. Graveyards soaked in mist, coffins pried open by moonlight, faces half lit by torch flames. The zombies themselves are iconic, pale, hollow-eyed, and eerily obedient. They don't attack with rage, they move with resignation. And somehow, that makes them more tragic than terrifying. You're not just afraid of them, you pity them. What makes The Plague of the Zombies stand apart is its moral weight. This isn't a story about survival against the dead. It's about confronting the systems that create them. The living exploit the dead, and the dead pay the price. And when resistance finally comes, it feels less like victory and more like long overdue reckoning. The climax doesn't offer simple relief. It feels heavy, earned, and sad. The cost of breaking the cycle is high, and the damage lingers even after the evil is confronted. Hammer understood something crucial here. True horror isn't just about monsters, it's about what people are willing to justify to protect their power. So let me ask you, do you see these zombies as monsters, or as victims? And which idea scares you more, that the dead rise to kill us, or that we refuse to let them rest? Share your thoughts in the comments. This is where classic zombie cinema ends, not with a scream, but with an accusation. And as we step away from the plague of the zombies, the silence feels heavier than the screams. These films didn't just show us the dead walking, they showed us why they rise. And what that says about us. From social collapse to quiet exploitation, each story left a scar in horror history. Now I'm curious, which of these classics still haunts you the most? And why? Drop your thoughts below. If you felt the chill, hit like, share this journey with another horror fan, and subscribe, because the dead never stop walking, and neither do we.